to Rick Caruso and Thrive LA and all of these groups that are genuinely concerned about 2026 and not ruffling feathers. I understand that logic and how it is good for politics, but it is not good for the people. My job in 2026 is to get people to break out of their political orthodoxy, to think about what is really in the best interest of California.
Well, that's a very big story.
This is a very big story. I'm giving it to you because you've been such a wonderful person to work with over the last few months.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a very special edition of the Steve Hilton Show. We're going to have one conversation today, and it's a big one with someone you know very well, who I've gotten to know recently. She is an absolutely fantastic and passionate advocate for our beautiful state of California. She's got a lot to say about that. And when I tell you who it is, you'll understand why this is going to be very interesting. It's Nicole Shanahan, who, of course, ran with Bobby Kennedy for vice president last year. Now is focused on California, and she has something very interesting to say about her future plans for California. There's been a lot of speculation that Nicole may run for governor of California, and she's going to tell us in this episode exactly what her plans are. And the other big news that Nicole has to share with us is about the recall effort in Los Angeles for Mayor Karen Bass. I've been involved in that, as you know. Nicole has too. And she's going to address something that happened this week, which surprised a lot of people, which is Rick Caruso in Los Angeles coming out against the recall. So Nicole is going to tell us all about that. She's got lots of new information, and that is where we started our conversation. All right, joining us now, I'm so happy to see Nicole Shanahan. How are you doing?
Hi, Steve. Really good to see you as well. Doing great.
Fantastic. So we've been working together. We're going to talk about that in a second on the Karen Bass recall, and then we're going to get into some broader questions about California. But let's start with the recall because it's really the focus of what we've been talking about, you and I and others. Just tell me a little bit about where we stand, but also whatever you want to say about it in terms of, you know, why you think it's so important for this recall to happen.
Yeah, and a really important disclaimer, I'm not part of the recall committee. I seated it. I know who's running it. We stay in touch. I did help, introduce a few people to each other, but I'm not actually listed on the recall. I'm not its chairman. In fact, it was intentional that the recall had no chairman because we wanted to keep it truly bipartisan. So the 5 individuals who have asked for the recall are citizens from Los Angeles, and it is a truly bipartisan group. Now, this week, unfolding in the news and giving you the scoop, Steve, LA Times has asked for it, but I'm going to point them to this podcast so that people can hear it in our own words because that's so valuable. Rick Caruso, who's come out against the recall. That was a surprise because I was in touch with Rick in January and we had discussed the recall. I had gone to Jason Lauren from Thrive LA. Everyone was on board in January and February for the recall. And so I was like, okay, great. I was asked to push it forward because I have a great team, very strong media team, groups of wonderful people that I got to meet along the campaign trail when I ran with Bobby Kennedy for president and vice president. And so I had that team ready to go and put it on this recall. The recall got up and running through a heroic effort.
Yes, I know.
You were in the room in one of those meetings, and just such a heroic effort of individuals, young people coming together who want to see accountability in California, a place where it's been so hard to get any accountability from any of our leadership because we're in political identity politics gridlock. And it's been very, I felt in January and February that this recall was going to be such a unifying opportunity for our state to finally come together around common sense governance and common sense expectations. And so got it up and running in a record amount of time. This recall, we got from the initial seed date to the filing was a matter of 3 weeks, which is just insane. Great professional team. We have a path towards victory and putting in a new mayor. And I think it's important to do it soon because these contracts are getting signed. The rebuild contracts for Los Angeles are getting signed right now. Decisions such as whether or not we bury power lines underground, which is a no-brainer in the Santa Ana wind fire zone. We should put those electrical lines underground. So these decisions are being made in real time. They're important. People have lost faith in Mayor Bass. And, you know, just it was going great until this week. And Caruso came in and kind of, came out against it, which really gutted it for the time being. But it doesn't mean we can't revive it. And I think that's why this conversation is so timely.
And why? I'm just, curious. What's your take on why he's taken this position?
Well, so he shared with me his reasoning, and in very California fashion, he's afraid of being labeled a racist. And
Well, oh, for goodness
yeah,
sake.
yeah. And he's afraid of what the Hollywood powers that be will do to him. And it's like legitimately scared. And I empathize with that because I've been through it. I've been taken
Yes.
through it. I still get the Democratic Party of California's emails. So I see what they're saying about me constantly.
Wow.
And they've called me this billionaire oligarch, blah, 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 all of this stuff because they can't actually address the issues on the merits. And so they make it about identity politics. And that's not what this is. I mean, I'm a girl from Oakland, grew up on public assistance. I, literally have had Patrice Cullors calling me, the founder of BLM. Yeah. And when wanting to talk this stuff through, and I will get back to her, but it's like, I'm not trying to make this about politics. I'm trying to make this about accountability. And, this LA State Assembly member, Isaac Bryant, I've been in touch with him. This is not about identity politics. It's really about common sense governance. And, Isaac's asking me, well, what should we be doing? I'm like, don't bury toxic waste in Calabasas next to a school. I mean, Calabasas is up in arms. It's insanity. And he's like, well, what would you propose? And I'm like, not buy a school. We have the whole Central Valley we could contract through. If you let the residents of Palisades also contract with private groups that are insured and held liable for toxic waste management, it will not end up next to a school. And so that's the problem right now. The governor of California is just kind of throwing things around out there, and the state is not held accountable time and time again. Private companies are held far more accountable for waste removal than the state will be.
It's
So
amazing. I hadn't actually heard that. I mean, every day there's something new that underlines why the accountability for Karen Bass in particular is so important. I mean, just the latest was this extraordinary $1 billion deficit, the mismanagement of Los Angeles, and that people are going to have to lose their jobs, and I'm sure services will suffer, and so on. And every day that she's there, it's a bad day for LA.
it's a bad day for LA. And, what's good, and this is what I would just say to Rick Caruso and Thrive LA and all of these groups that are genuinely concerned about 2026 and not ruffling feathers and wanting to create a big enemy out of Karen Bass so that it is a 100% victory. I understand that logic and how it is good for politics, but it is not good for the people.
Exactly.
And what is oftentimes good for politics is bad for people. And we've got to get over that as a state and as a country.
100%. I mean, that's why I love the way you talk about this. It's so refreshing. And it's what, by the way, people say the whole time. It's like we're sick of all the politics. We just want practical things done. I mean, I use this phrase all the time: positive and practical. Just get stuff done, And
I've loved working with you, Steve. Part of this effort was this dream of a unity group for 2026. And I really think that this gives us a litmus test for who can work with whom, who is going to weather these identity politics storms, and I've really enjoyed working with you, Steve, and I really enjoy the
Yeah,
work you're doing.
likewise. And I really think it's, we love this state. I mean, totally different backgrounds, but, I came here, we moved here 2012. And I'm not just, I'm just that I love California. I'm in love with California. It's such an amazing place and it represents so much, the best of America. And to see it being mismanaged this way, it's not a partisan thing. We're Californians. We love this beautiful state and we got to turn things around.
Yeah, absolutely. It's and I do believe, like, I would still work with Rick Caruso to rebuild LA. And I think we just have to get in agreement around, we're not going to fix anything in this country if like when we hold leaders accountable, we're like slandered for being bigots. And we've got to get over that. It's just ridiculous. And Newsom's trying to do it with his podcast. And you can't just do these 180s. You have to authentically be doing the right thing at the right time. And rather than doing his rebrand right now, he really should be trying to figure out where to put all that toxic waste. Steve, I can't tell you how many people are leaving Los Angeles because they can't go in the ocean. And many people are there because of the ocean.
It's just so sad. This is the most amazing place. LA is such an incredible city. I was
Oh,
just
yeah.
there this week. I was up in Palisades actually because we're filming something for Fox. They're doing a Fox Nation special on my book, Caliphalia. And I was up in the Palisades. You can still smell what happened. It's so heartbreaking to see the devastation. And it's still there and you can smell it. I mean, it's just awful.
Test the soil, Steve.
Right.
Test the water. It's really, really bad. I mean, there's ppms in the water that would, I mean, kill anything in its path. Like, it's really bad. I'm concerned about what's going to happen to the cancer rate in Los Angeles due
Yeah.
to this. The fact that private citizens, like owners of their own land, can't remediate their own waste on their own land from fires that shouldn't have happened in the first place. I mean, it's just layers upon layers of mismanagement.
It's totally. I mean, and on the Rick Caruso thing, I mean, that's so disappointing because, leadership is not like, oh, I'm worried what people are going to say. It's the opposite. It's like, I don't care what people say. This is the right thing to do.
It's about accountability. It's why our city charters have recall paths. And I do understand it's 2025 elections to come at the end of 2026, but we don't get a new mayor until 2027.
Yes, and
And
there's a
like,
lot to do now.
we're behind.
Yeah.
We are behind what would have been the correct path for engagement of contractors on waste removal and rebuild. And it's really sad to see that there's almost like this eminent domain aspect happening over the
I mean,
Palisades.
it was really shocking just being there. And, of course, there are people where there's things happening, not that much, honestly, it's just dead, literally. And you just think, wait a minute, this is nearly 3 months ago. I mean, what's happening here?
Yeah, it's been 3 months. I even in Malibu, like testing the soil in some of these neighborhoods that burned down, even if your house is still there, you got to test your soil because there's stuff ending up all over our natural systems that are really, really not good. Especially, like, children shouldn't be playing in soil that's downstream or around some of these burn zones. Like, it's pretty bad stuff right now.
Yeah, yeah. Just remind us where exactly we are in the recall process with Karen Bass. Just what are the next steps if people want to get involved and all
Yeah.
of that?
Yeah, so we're gonna move forward with it because I think the will to do so is still there, and I think it would be a mistake to shut the recall down, because Rick Caruso, whom we like, right, for rebuilding, he's very capable of it, but for those individuals who think that it's somehow a bad idea politically. The will is there of the people. We can get these signatures. It's a bipartisan group. No personal offense to Mayor Bass, but there's been too many errors made. And it is the right of the people to expect a certain standard. And so the next step is April. We start collecting signatures. We're aiming to collect around 400,000 signatures on petitions. You can go to recallkarenbassnow.com to request a petition. And we'll have those ready to go. We have 3 months to collect all of those signatures. And quite frankly, I'm not in charge of running the recall. I don't have an official title at all, but I still stand by it as its primary financial backer. Steve, I can't thank you enough for also, taking a look at LA, having really looking out for Angelenos at a time where, politics is ripping that city apart. And what we really just need is competence.
Exactly. And the thing that's interesting to me about, the recall, I've had a lot of people, just regular people, some involved in the media and so on, just chatting over the last few um, weeks, months, actually. And there's also a Gavin Newsom recall that's out there, but so many people make a distinction between the two and say with Karen Bass, it is so merited. I mean, if you just look at the catalogue of failure and incompetence, both in the run up to the fire, in the moments of the fires, in the as we've been discussing subsequently, there's just no question that as we said, every day that she's there is a bad day for LA, and it's
Yeah.
urgent. It's an urgent need to get some real serious
Yeah.
competent leadership in there, and so a lot of people say that. He said, yeah, I'm not sure about the Newsom one.
Well, Newsom's turned
Yes.
out.
Yes.
Newsom's totally termed out, right? And he's checked out. It's very clear. And yes, we could get maybe a year of a new governor, but it's been tried twice. And he's termed out. Whereas Karen Bass, this is her first term. She's, gunning for reelection. So anything that we put together now in terms of highlighting her lack of qualifications for running the city, we can reuse in 2026. We can also use, and this is the thing that I think that, Thrive LA and Rick Cruz and these folks don't see, is that this is an opportunity to work on voter registration and updating voter registrations, because I can tell you there's a lot of Democrats still registered as Democrats who do not feel like their party is representing them anymore. And we have an opportunity right now to swap them over to other or joining the Republican Party. I am personally registered as a California other, and I think that there's a lot of us out there who really are just sick of bipartisan politics and just want good leadership.
Yeah, and I think that the one thing that we talked about before, and I think it's so relevant to this, is the machine, right? The Democrat machine in California and in LA, and it's clearly kind of been being mobilized to prop up Karen Bass. That's what needs to be defeated as well.
Yeah. And LA, I think, is our opportunity to do it. And we are a great state of individuals who can find common ground. And we will find it as long as we stop calling each other bigots when we are not bigots. I am not a bigot. And I'm not an
I mean,
oligarch. And
it's the reason I just sort of couldn't believe it when you said it feels so lame and kind of old
yeah.
fashioned actually as well. Like so in the past, like we're still doing this, like calling people racist just because you can't think of anything substantive to say.
No, it's really unfortunate, and it actually hurts the communities that need help the most. Like, I want to get out there and make sure that every part of LA that is affected can now be cared for, because we've overcome these silly politics that have taken us down to lower and lower standards. And we have active arson issues right now. Active arsons all over Southern California, all over the state, but particularly Southern California. And so I think that we have to look at this as an opportunity to finally get over the silliness and really just get to work on making sure the good people of this state get to live a good life, that they can go
Yes.
to the beach, take their shoes off, jump in the ocean, and not be afraid if they're going to contract a horrible disease. And I mean,
Yeah.
that's really what it boils down to.
I
Let's
love the
just,
way you put that. I love it's beautiful. It's like, but it's simple and beautiful. The good people living a good life. That is and everyone understands, I think, when I'm on the road and I talk about what California represents, it's intangible in a way, but it just we know what it means. We know what we mean when we talk about the spirit of California and that sense of being a place for rebels and creators and people who just don't want to be told what to do. They want to enjoy the beauty of our natural surroundings and just hang out and be good people. That's California.
yeah. Yeah, that is California. It's the best state. I love it. I'm
Yes.
not leaving. And I think it's a fight worth fighting because, it is, we're a place of compassion. Um, and we're a place where we just have to find our ability to fight again. We got to fight hard against these nationalistic policies.
Can I ask you a little bit to go back a bit and think about what's gone wrong in California? Because in my book, I try to identify I mean, to me, it's just that it's all got so ideological and political, and pushing things that actually make no sense in a practical way. What do you? How's it happened? How's California gone off the rails in your understanding of it?
So my understanding is that we are, I mean, it really starts with money, right? California is the sixth largest economy in the world. And that's what makes it attractive to everyone, the good guys and the bad guys. And so if you're trying to undermine security in the United States, where are you going to start? California. California also happens to be a place with some of the most compassionate, capable, wonderful people on the planet. But it also happens to be a place of large industry that has its own, so large industry like Silicon Valley has its own hierarchy of leaders, and then Hollywood as well, its own hierarchy. And anytime there are small groups of people with that amount of power, getting leverage ends up being, how do I put it? Where to plant the blackmail campaigns, right?
Right.
And so it's and I've watched this from afar. I'm formerly Silicon Valley elite. I'm no longer Silicon Valley elite. I'm kind of the scourge of Silicon Valley.
Yes, they're not
But
they're not fans of yours now.
no, they're not fans of mine now. But that being said, there are more people willing to kind of question the orthodoxy around what the Democratic Party has been doing and where the Democratic Party has taken the state. And they're starting to question it. And as long as you kind of avoid the very much ingrained Trump derangement syndrome and just focus on the issues, you realize we all have much more in common and we all want the same thing for the state. But politics has really, unfortunately, gotten in the way. I do believe that the Democratic Party has been infiltrated by ideology that reminds me of the ideology that turned China communist, that really led to many fascist regimes taking over great countries and using good people to do it, and using their moral compassion to do so. And I think that's what's happened, is that we have this ideological vacuum that various bad actors have been able to exploit to undermine security in our state, but also security nationally. And this is why I think that, California is not just something Californians should worry about, but it is something that Americans are watching very closely. And I think that's what we're realizing through this vast campaign, is that every American kind of has a stake in it. They have a stake in it because if you can get away with that kind of negligence and mismanagement in arguably the most famous city in America, you can do it anywhere here
Yes,
across the
exactly.
country.
I agree with that. I'm so interested. It's funny you should bring up the Chinese Communist kind of reference there, because one of the chapters in my book about how California went off the rails is actually called Maoism, um, and about how that kind of intolerant attitude, and you got to conform, and you got to say this even when it makes no sense, and you're going to be ostracized if you stray from the party line.
Yeah.
You've really seen a lot of that in Democrat politics in California.
You definitely have, and that's that intolerant orthodoxy that I think is really taking communities that think they're doing the right thing by aligning with this orthodoxy, but then waking up the next day and seeing their communities worse off. So, one of the messages that I've had for former people I've worked with on social justice issues, I'm like, is your community doing better or worse? And a lot of the times it's a complex situation. But when you really kind of get through it, they realize that something is wrong, and that maybe these social justice causes that seemed like really good causes may have been co-opted by an outside group that are actually intentionally trying to sabotage all of these efforts.
That's super interesting. Let's talk about that a bit more, because that's a deep way of looking at it. I mean, what immediately popped into my head as you were talking about that is, while all this social justice activity has been going on, we have the highest poverty rate in the country, the highest
Yeah.
proportion of people living in poverty.
And we
Not
have the
just
highest import rate of certified criminals. We are actually importing individuals under the umbrella of empathy. We are importing individuals that are convicted criminals in their own country. And sanctuary city laws are protecting those criminals. I was just at Santa Rita jail, and if they find out that someone who is suspected of murder is from a different country, they're not legally allowed to say that they are from a different country and here without papers. Even if there's plenty of proof, blood on their hands that they've killed somebody, you're not allowed to mention that they might be a criminal from another country with no papers.
It's totally insane. I mean, it really is. And but it's the ideology that drives that. It's like, well, you can't say that because they'll go back to racism.
Yeah. Yeah. And the sad part is the social justice warriors that are Americans living in these communities that these convicted criminals from other out of country are harboring in, they're hurting their communities. They're hurting their American communities that have been crying out for social justice. And because they're now stuck in this inflexible ideology, they can't come out against our open borders. And that's where we get in trouble in California. When you get gridlocked in an ideology because it's the political party line.
I mean, that is it in a nutshell. That's exactly right. Tell me more about what what you're seeing. What are the things that you're, focused on as you travel and you think about California? What are your priorities?
I mean, my priorities are, and Steve, I'm just gonna share with you now. I'm giving you the exclusive. I'm not running for governor in 2026.
Well, that's
But
a very big story.
this is a very big story. I'm giving it to you because you've been such a wonderful person to work with over the last few months. And I believe that my job in 2026 is to get people to break out of their political orthodoxy, to think about what
I
is
love it.
really in the best interest of California. I am not a Democrat. I am not a Republican. I am an independent, and I'm here to support the revival of California.
You're making me feel so tingly in the best way. It's a beautiful vision. That's right. That's how we'll do it, by bringing people together for something positive and practical and not ideological.
And now is the time for people to step up. And I will be watching closely, and I will be supporting those individuals that continue to be brave enough to stand up against harmful political ideology to do what is right for the people.
Love it. Well, that's an amazing. Thank you, Nicole, for sharing that. So some of the things, I mean, one of the areas that we really connected on And I wrote about years, 10 years ago in a book I wrote called More Human. It's that whole area. I'd love you to talk about it because you're such an expert in this space, and it really matters to me. And I think again, it's really goes to the essence of California, which is that whole interplay with food and farming and what we produce and nature and the soil, all of that. It's really we really align on that, and I'd love you just to talk about it a bit.
Absolutely. One of the things I'm most concerned about and why I think it's best that I stay out of running for politics because it gives me the flexibility to continue to work with everybody is farming here in the state. We are the breadbasket of the United States here in California. We produce the country's vegetables and fruits. We're a major dairy producer, and we are losing this capacity at a rate that is truly existential. And no amount of indoor grown food is going to substitute for the nutrient potential that our state provides naturally. And so the stewardship of the small family farmer is something that I really think is the number one priority right now. And it's interesting because once you start looking at what the family farmer is dealing with here, you start running into water management, which is a big deal. It touches everything. You start running into the chronic health disease epidemic, which we realize is tied to inputs such as glyphosate. You start running into geoengineering, which has its own implications for farming and water. Water samples across the state are showing a unnatural spike in metals and chemicals that are being now linked to the geoengineering contract. Santa Barbara County has a geoengineering contract. You can go find it on their website. It is real.
Okay,
It's happening.
I want to have a whole
Yeah.
digression into this, right? Because you and I talked about it. And almost, I don't want to say the next day, but like very soon after, and you told me what's going on, and I was like, wow, this is like way bigger of a deal than I appreciated. I think almost the next day I was in Orange County. I was at Huntington Beach, talking to someone there. Um, he was literally pointing in the sky, and it was a very gloomy, cloudy day. And it was kind of middle of the day. And he said, honestly, 18 months ago, this time of year, maybe even a year ago, this would have burnt off by now. It's just classic morning marine layer. This is not marine layer. This cloud that you see here on the coast, we're now experiencing, it stays for days and it arrives in the middle of the day. It's the opposite of what we used to have, for forever, which is a bit of morning cloud marine layer that burns off. We're stuck in this gray, cloudy situation. And I thought, I can't believe, I mean, and they all know, and everyone's videoing it, and it's totally changed how
Yeah.
they experience their city.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have a dear friend from high school in Paradise, California, and was there during the fires. Those were the first campaign fires. And he was telling me that there were people on the street with signs saying, "What the hell are you spraying up there?" And we don't actually fully have we don't have the information. We don't have a database we can go to see what it is they're doing during these the aerosol injection projects. And we really need to know because things are starting to change, that I think that more and more people are able to scientifically link um, to drying out of the redwoods, even an increase in there's a beetle that's eating the beautiful California
The
redwoods,
bark beat, yes.
the bark beetle, and the trees are coming down at a rate never before seen. And you can't blame it on precipitation because look at the precipitation numbers. They're the same. They haven't changed over the last 20 years. So average precipitation over the last 20 years has remained stable. So there's something else going on. There's some toxicity that's happening that hasn't happened. When I was a kid living here in California. And if you look at some of the geoengineering papers and some of the things they use for solar radiation management, as well as cloud seeding, can be linked to adverse um, uh, ecological impacts, that there's
Yes.
no rules or liabilities that are in place right now. There hasn't even been a court case to try some of this stuff. So we literally are working completely blind.
Yeah, it's amazing to me that this I mean, that's what when we talked about it, I was, to use that cliche term, gobsmacked because I was like, "What?" I always thought it was a bit of a joke in the sense that I remember hearing about it, 2 decades ago back in the UK. I remember making a joke about it. "Oh, that'd be cool. You could, have sunshine every day, and then you'd win every election in England, with the terrible weather." And I didn't take it seriously. And the fact that it's happening but we don't know. Tell me a bit more about the Santa Barbara contract, because that's very interesting.
Yeah, it's not the only county in America with these contracts. There's governments have been contracting with groups around cloud seeding, thinking that it is offsetting the impacts of climate change.
Right.
And
Okay, that's the motivation.
it is the motivation, and that's why people buy into it. And because it is a concern, right? Climate change is a concern. Severe weather events, droughts, these are all real concerns. But overall precipitation in California is okay. It has been good for 4 years. So these contracts are signed. They, allow for private companies to go out and spray. You don't need much of a plane to do it. You can outfit a little Cessna with this capability. But there's, the technology is variable. You can do large scale planes that spray different compounds, small planes that spray another compound.
It's amazing that
Um,
this is going on. It's we're all affected by it. I mean, it's amazing.
Well, Florida's trying to ban it. Tennessee, wow, I've got to say, I am
Okay.
impressed with Tennessee. They have outlawed it. It's been banned in Tennessee at a state level. That doesn't prevent the DOE from conducting experiments where, a lot of funding is coming through the Department of Energy. So they're running these experiments, no requirement for disclosure. And it again hasn't been court tested. So what happens when a state bans geoengineering and aerosol injections, but the federal government is still operating these programs confidentially?
Incredibly interesting. Confident secretly. I mean, it's incredible. I think that at the very least, again, going back to your whole theme of like bringing people together and just moving things forward in a unifying way, at the very least, we could all agree that this is something where you should, at the minimum, have a total pause while you find out what's going on, like who's doing it, where, what's happening, what are the impacts. At least tell us what's happening.
Yeah, and it would be great if we had maybe a third party group or a community group or a city council group that can actually test the cocktails that go out, and really allow public scrutiny of
Yes.
the practice.
I mean, if you
And
don't, like, going back to, Huntington Beach and my story there, where this guy said, wait, like you're changing the weather in a very dramatic way. Nobody voted for it. It wasn't in any election, set of promises. It's just sort of happening. And there's
no.
no control, no accountability. It's really unbelievable, actually.
Yeah, there's no control and no accountability, and there's no checks
Yeah.
and balances at all. So
Let's go back to the farming thing, because it reminded me of a story. I was so heartbreaking. It was in the Central Valley. And some people came to an event I did, farmers, and I remember it so clearly. It was so poignant because they grew figs. They were and it'd been in a family farm, been in their family for generations, like 5 generations, I think they said. And and there's a nice, not elderly couple, but I suppose you could, on the sort of later side in years. So sweet and lovely, and I was just asking them what they were, what's going on, and they said, well, we finally pulled the plug, and we're moving. I think they actually moved to Tennessee. And I said, oh, what's happening to the farm? So, well, we had to stop the farm 6 years ago. And I said, what do you mean? So, well, the water, they went through all the things, the burdens, the regulatory stuff, on and on. that they said, well, we didn't want to move, so we couldn't make the fig business work anymore. So we thought, well, let's just do packaging. So that's heartbreaking in itself. So instead, they stopped growing figs. Now you have imported figs from Turkey, and this fig farming business turned into a packaging business for figs coming in from outside the country. And then they said we couldn't even make that work because it's too expensive. So now we're leaving. It's so sad.
I've heard dozens of stories similar, people leaving the growing business. So growers, it used to be you were a grower and a packer, then you had to choose one. I mean, between the USDA's regulatory burdens, and then the state, and then the local county, and then the water department, which is its own rogue agency, it's crushing. It is soul crushing. It is financially crushing. It is economically crushing. I mean, it's just it is, I think, the most important issue for us to address in our state is the farming situation and water management. There was a bill, Steve, I think about 3 years ago now, that passed, that the voters wanted, and it passed, and it requires the state to build more water storage infrastructure. We have not
Yes.
invested in water infrastructure in like, I believe, well over a generation.
Oh yeah.
Proper.
I think it's about 40. No, totally. It's an unbelievable negligence. Yeah.
It's unbelievable. And it is probably the thing that would knock out so many, if we just did it well, it would knock out so many of the problems our state is facing right now, from fire management issues, right? Because we have water storage. We can fight fires. We don't have Los Angeles County saying we ran out of water on the second day of a giant wildfire. It's really, none of this stuff should be happening. And it all comes down to listening to the farmers. The farmers do have the answers. And as we start to address those problems intelligently, and we're not talking about like tens of billions of dollars. We can do this for well under $10 billion, and we can do it well, and we will solve so many of our state's burdens.
I know. On this, I know we have a mutual friend, Chef Andrew Gruel. Actually, he's in Huntington Beach. His restaurant's down there.
And he just got appointed to city council.
Yes, so he's fantastic.
Wonderful.
But as you're talking, I'm reminded of another friend. I wonder if you know her. I met her. It's a funny story how we met, but Alice Waters, who's been
the chef.
Yeah. Have you connected
in Berkeley? Not. I've been to a restaurant because I grew up in the Bay Area, and in college I could finally afford to go there. And she's the original kind of regenerative farm to table chef.
She's
incredible person.
She's fantastic. Yeah, it was a great story actually. How I met her was so back in the day when I was working in the government in the UK, as you know, people who listen and watch me regularly know I love food. I'm obsessed with food. I love to cook, and I love good food. And so I paid a lot of attention to this when I was working in the government in 10 Downing Street, and particularly school food. And I loved what Jamie Oliver, the celebrity chef, had done in terms of trying a really, really fantastic campaign to make school food healthy in the UK. And I really connected with him on that and tried to help him navigate the government and so on, not with great success, honestly, because of the bureaucracy and actually the corruption, all these contracts, these sort of mass catering companies with contracts with the government. That's a whole mess. Anyway, I became good friends with Jamie Oliver. And one time, soon after we moved here, he was out here in the Bay Area. He was very interested in the early days of social media, using Instagram and so on. So he was out here to learn about that. And one time he was here, actually, he came to our house and I cooked him dinner, which is his assistant who's with him said, like, people are like that. He said that never happens because people are terrified, of cooking for me. And we had a fun dinner. But then another time we didn't have time for that. And he said, I'm only here for a little bit, but I'm having lunch at Chez Panisse. Do you want to come and have lunch with me there? And I thought, yeah, amazing. I'd never been. Such a legendary place, Alice Waters' restaurant, the original one, still in the same location in Berkeley. And I went there and I got there a little bit early, actually. And they took me into the sort of private dining room there. I said, I'm meeting Jamie Oliver. And in walks this little lady. And it was Alice. And he didn't mention that he's having lunch with Alice Waters in Chez Panisse. And so the three of
Yeah.
us had this incredible lunch, and she's just a radiant, incredible person. There's something magical about Alice Waters, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's because she's committed herself to California.
Yeah.
She's not doing it out of a desire to be a celebrity chef. She's doing it out of
Yes.
true appreciation for the bounty that the state provides. And we have some of the best farmers here in California. I just it's my favorite. I mean, if I were running for governor, how I would run and campaign is I would do a farm and food tour. And we would get to meet people from all walks of life across the state, from different ethnic backgrounds. I mean, it's just a delicious state. and
Yes. Yes.
and it's a great way to get to know people. And most importantly, it's a great way to get people sharing what their experiences are like in their home, and understanding what the state could be doing better for them.
It's a great idea, and food just brings us together. It's reminding me of a lot of stuff I did in the past, actually, is using, and I started restaurants myself in the UK. In fact, I always joke with Jamie Oliver because he started a restaurant called 15, which was all about combining the restaurant business with youth training programs and taking kids with difficult backgrounds and training them in the business. And we did that before he did. I always joke. We had a restaurant called The Good Cook many years ago in London. It's a tough business, the restaurant business. I love that
It's
idea.
really a tough business.
It's a really, really great idea. And actually, Alice has a wonderful, her you could say legacy project beyond the restaurant is the edible schoolyard, which,
Mm-hmm.
as its
Yeah.
name suggests, is like kids growing things in the schoolyard, and then they
Yeah.
learn to cook them, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Yeah, yeah. There is some movement on banning certain chemicals from the school lunch program, which is a great first step. I wish that we didn't have to do it with regulation. I wish that we could do it instead with the schools doing contracts with local growers
Yes,
and local chefs, because if we start putting things in the positive versus the no, right?
it's a lovely way of thinking about it.
I
Yes,
really think that we can save time, money, attention span, and get to what we want faster, which is a state that nourishes its people and provides them just the basics, but well, right? We got to do the
yes.
basics well.
Well, that's right. And actually, it reminds me of, I mean, I think such an incredible accomplishment that you and Bobby pulled off with this agenda that as people now know it, it's like top of the list for MAHA, make America healthy again, just from nowhere, but because of you, just right at the top of the political agenda. You have people talking about this who never were before. You got the Republican Party embracing something that in the past they've been seen as more of a left wing cause, and now you've got hardcore Trump supporters loving all this. It's amazing what's happened.
Yeah, I love the coming together of MAGA, and there would be no MAHA without MAGA. And I think that's really important for people to understand, how the Democrats have branded and the mainstream media has branded MAGA is so incorrect. I believed the rhetoric for years, and it wasn't until we were so embraced and had a chance to actually get to know our fellow countrymen and women who deeply care about policy over politics. I mean, MAGA, they don't run, most MAGA, they identify as MAGA before they identify as a Republican. And I think that's a really beautiful thing. And MAHA is the same thing. It's the same way. It's individuals that are identifying with causes over politics. It's a beautiful trajectory we're on as a nation.
Exactly. To bring it back to California, and again, we've talked about this. There's nowhere that should be leading this more than California. I mean, we literally grow the things that will help make America healthy again.
Yeah, it's true. And we can grow more of it.
100%. Exactly.
And we can grow it better.
Exactly. I love it. I love it. So Nicole, what are the, I mean, the recall is obviously a focus. What are the other things that you're going to be working on? I mean, we've talked about some of them now. I mean, is there anything that we haven't talked about that that is in your thoughts about California?
Well, I'm really looking at Los Angeles as a place to audition uh, our next governor of the state of California. Because if you are really going to do a good job with the state of California, you have an opportunity right now to address LA's immediate needs. And so I'm looking very, very closely at the dynamics around Los Angeles. I am an open door to Democrats, Republicans, others. Like, I really want us all working together, and I want there to be a funding source for politicians from across the aisle who are truly going to get over these silly identity politics and focus on what I really, really think starts with the water and the soil and the air. And we go from there. Communities thrive from addressing those three primary needs.
Yeah, I love that. It's true, and it's so very Californian, I think. Um, it's not an accident that the that sort of farm to table movement started here, Alice, as we've discussed, and so many great people who've built that movement and are taking it forward now. That is us here in California.
Yeah. Yeah, and we can do it in a lovely way as well. It's like, while I disagree with Caruso backpedaling on the recall, I still like him. And and I'm frustrated, but at the same time, I understand that we have to. We're still stuck in the old way of doing things. It's just the reality, and I won't do things the old way, but a lot of people will, and we have to figure out how to work with those individuals too.
Yeah, exactly. And do something about the kind of the machine politics that actually blocks the solutions that are common sense that people would support.
Yeah. Yeah, and the the machine politics, really what drives the machine is fear. And really it's the fear of being shamed and slandered. Um, and so I kind of got over that. It was like a band-aid getting ripped off when I decided to run with Kennedy. So I really recommend getting that band-aid just ripped off, because once that band-aid's ripped off, you can just be yourself. You don't have to you don't have to play these silly political games anymore.
So the last thing I just want to ask you about, because as someone who's been in, one or other aspect of this whole broadly speaking business of media, politics, arguments, ideas, and so on, one of the most impressive things are these incredible videos that you put out. Um, they're amazing, and they just convey so much. Tell me about that.
Well, Steve, think about what political dollars are used for. When you get those chip in $2, chip in $3, we need you. We will not defeat the other side unless you give us $1. Um, what are they raising for? They're raising for advertisement. They're raising for video production, social media people, brand managers, political advisors. And what do those political advisors do? They tell you how to do media. And then there's like finance campaign. Look at the campaign finance stuff is like a tiny, tiny, tiny part of it. Really, and what I mean by campaign finance is like the lawyers that make sure you don't
Yes.
like commit any issues with campaign finance, how you spend your dollars. But so it all goes to advertising. Like that is that's where those $10 billion that went into all the PACs and in this last cycle, advertising. And so I was like, if I can do advertising better, cheaper, and take no money from the people, but I take direction from them, you read into the zeitgeist of what the people want. Don't take their dollars. Take what I find much more valuable than taking money, um, in terms of political savvy. Take the cultural references, right? Take meet the people where they are, but you will only be able to do that if you pay very, very close attention to these nuances that are really driving the political narrative. I call it the zeitgeist. Like, where is
Yeah.
the zeitgeist? The zeitgeist doesn't come from the top of like these fancy political party gala dinners. I don't go to those. I think those are ridiculous. And they make you a worse politician. Um, you have to take your cues from like out there from like the people. And then that makes you both a better politician, but it makes you more effective in how you spend dollars on advertising. And so I'm involved in the production, just hands on with many of the videos and the social media strategy. Like, it has to be personal. People are sick of the old way of doing politics, including how they receive political messaging.
I mean, they're just so well done. Especially, I've got to say that one, the spoof documentary about the MAGA people was so brilliant.
Oh, the MAGA peoples. Yeah, you would appreciate that being from England.
Exactly. It was so good.
It was actually a really hard thing to do. Like, that was like telling who the MAGA people are sincerely, but also in a lighthearted way. Because it is very heavy. It's the story of people trying to live out the American dream, but afflicted by all of this, like, real mismanagement and malfeasance, and and the mainstream media coming after them and feeling attacked by their own country. I mean, it's a heavy story to tell. And so I was like, we have to find a light way of telling it from an outsider's perspective. And again, in the zeitgeist right now is the fact that the UK is being stormed by outside forces. Like, cultural UK is under attack. And it really started with this desire to have empathy for refugees, but it's gotten out of control, and it's now turned into something entirely. It's turned into selling out cultural UK to, you know, millions of immigrants who don't understand English culture. And in the effort of being accepting, you're really letting go of a cultural heritage. And as long as that's done intentionally, that's fine. But I don't think it's being done intentionally. I think there's a bit of a shock factor happening. So the idea that you tell the MAGA stories through what's happening in the UK, and, you know, if you go back to the video, there's a plane flying over of these explorers from Great Britain trying to understand who the MAGA peoples are and how they're standing up for their culture, for cultural America. And being able to tell that story, and it's not really you know, there's parody, but it's real, it's true, it's all happening. And so pairing a format of parody with a something that is so deeply real and lived, and there's pain, and, you know, and there's fear. I think that has been a really it's been a way to get the message across that's approachable.
Big time. They were great. It's just a huge, I don't know, it was just a real highlight of the whole election. Everyone's like, wait, when's Nicole's new video coming out? They were so good. They were so good.
Yeah, and the last one we did was for the recall.
Yes, people should
and
check
that
it
was
out.
just from me, but it's actually more about California in general, and we're going to find more ways to tell the California story. And it's not, you know, I hate political advertising, but I do love giving people a way to digest their experience.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, it's been brilliant. Nicole, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. I love it. Some big news. We gotta, you know, take that very seriously. It was really, really interesting. Really appreciate it. We'll talk more, I know, but thank you so much for being with us there. It was really great. I feel very inspired and nourished. That was the word you used. I really feel that.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to, Steve. You've been, you know, you have been just in the short amount of time I've gotten a chance to work with you, someone who stands by their word, doesn't backtrack. You haven't thrown anyone under the bus. I mean, I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you. And we'll see you soon. Thank you, Nicole.
See you. Thank you.